Joining us now to discuss, David Gergen, CNN senior political analyst, former advisor to Presidents Nixon, Ford, Reagan, and Clinton. Good to see you as always, David. If we pick up with those comments from former Maryland Governor Larry Hogan, you also had former Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson saying, look, I think Larry Hogan's a star, but I think more voices are really where it's at in terms of the party. Larry Hogan said elected office isn't the only way to make a difference. There's a frustration about the divisive politics in this country at this point, and yet the loudest, most extreme voices do continue to dominate. Do you see a scenario where that changes at all?
We'll have to wait and see, Erica. It was good to be here this morning. And I must tell you that I think increasingly this has become a two-person race. There's Trump and there's DeSantis, and then there's everybody else in the Republican side. And no one in that everybody else column I think has the chances to really advance until DeSantis has been checked out. You know, the press is we know all about Donald Trump, more than we want to know in some cases. But DeSantis has not gone through that kind of screening, and the press will be doing that in the next few weeks because it's so obviously a Trump versus DeSantis race right now, and from that we'll know, does anybody else have a chance? And right now I would say that nobody else is in the running. There's, as I say, there's DeSantis, there's Trump, and then there's a whole stream of other people coming on. But look at Jim Sciutto would respond to this. Look at Mike Pompeo. You know, one would think that he's a heavyweight within the party, and he's not showing up anywhere. And he was not speaking at CPAC as best I can tell. And I don't think he had an invitation there.
David Gergen, I would never debate you on political history, or if I did, I would be very bright, but I'm gonna do it anyway. No, I'm just gonna ask the question.
Okay.
If we look at the last several presidential cycles, the front runner or front runners at this stage of the race almost always flame out, right? I mean, go back to 2008, McCain was dead in the water, going nowhere. I mean, Obama was considered a long shot then, came through. You know, you go to 2016, of course, people eliminated Trump as a candidate. Biden, you know, really didn't have a chance until South Carolina in the 2020 cycle.
Right.
What does history tell us about front runners at this stage of the race, and why do you think that those front runners are likely to stay front runners?
Well, I think Trump is likely to stay a front runner because you know he's taken a lot of hits, and there he is still standing. The CPAC is still his. You know, the fire and brimstone that we associate with CPAC has gone out a lot, and Trump's fire has gone out a lot, but he's still out there. On the other hand, DeSantis is I think a more if anybody's going to go down, it may be DeSantis. Typically when these new faces come on, some of them peak very early, as you suggest, and then they after some initial view that they're going to do really really well, they fade, and new people come to the fore, like an Obama comes to the fore out of nowhere. And when Biden came back, he was a known figure, but he was more durable because he was such a known figure. We don't know yet whether DeSantis is durable as a candidate. He's clearly a very shrewd, very interesting, very bright guy. On the other hand, you know, a lot of the early reporting suggests he can be very mean. He can be very tough on people, not very pleasant underneath all this. So we'll have to wait and see, Jim, how that all sort of works out. Does DeSantis wear well? You know, do people sort of, as they get accustomed to it? If I were Donald Trump, I'd be really worried about DeSantis.
Seems like it may be, based on how much time he's spending on him. Sorry, Eric.
Yeah. I would agree with you, Jim. I think you're right. But I think that then leads us to this question. So if it is Trump and DeSantis right now, but there's a chance, as you point out, David, that for all of the excitement about Ron DeSantis, maybe that doesn't work out. Is there anyone else you see in the wings who could then step in, or does that then just hand this nomination to Donald Trump?
Well, that's a really, really good question. I think he'd easily hand the nomination to Donald Trump, and then he would reach out and possibly get Nikki Haley to be his vice presidential candidate for some obvious reasons. I think she's sort of she has some upside potential that I don't think has been tapped into yet. She's one of the more I've done events with her, and I must tell you, she's attractive. She's interesting. She thinks well on her feet. So I could see her rising as this process goes on. but some of the rest of them, I just don't see where I don't see where the rise comes from.
Jeff, you were at CPAC for part of the weekend's events. That's a pretty dark speech. And it's interesting, Republicans lost in 2018, 2020, and 2022. Many Republicans would blame that guy, Donald Trump. Yet he says, I am your retribution. You need me again.
Exactly. And look, most presidential campaigns have bumper sticker messages, so I guess that fits on one. But boy, if you unpack it a little bit, like you say, he is the cause for a lot of the Republican party's woes. I mean, so the reality here is, to that crowd, to that room, they loved it. It was a celebration of Donald Trump in every form. But there was such grievance and so much more backward-looking sort of moods and moments than forward-looking. But what a contrast with Governor DeSantis over the weekend at the Reagan Library. And Ronald Reagan's pictures hang over CPAC. His image is still sort of mentioned a lot, but his conservative policies and ideals are mentioned very little by Donald Trump. So that's what is fascinating. This week, I think, will be sort of seen as a important marker on the road to 2024. Both of those men over the next week are going to be in Iowa. Governor DeSantis on Friday, Donald Trump on Monday. Why does that matter? Because it shows what the appetite and room is in the Republican primary electorate for someone other than Donald Trump. And Larry Hogan is also interesting in this, a component. If others follow his lead and stay out of the race, a narrow field certainly does not help Donald Trump.
And so you mentioned DeSantis. If you look at the polling right now, it's early. Nobody votes for a year. Iowa caucus is next February sometime. But if you look back at history, the two guys or one guy way up at the top. If there's a big gap, it tends to matter. Ron DeSantis at the Reagan Library. Donald Trump runs against Reagan, runs against Bush, runs against the past, says he's the new Republican Party. Ron DeSantis trying to make a point there. No doubt who he has in mind. There are talkers and there are doers.
You didn't see our administration leaking like a sieve. You didn't see a lot of drama or palace intrigue. What you saw was surgical precision execution, day after day after day. And because we did that, we beat the left day after day after day. I think it goes back to this woke mind virus that's infected the left and all these other institutions.
The very end there is the governor making his case against the left. But the beginning of that was the case against Donald Trump. He didn't mention his name. Now, will DeSantis do it that strongly on a debate stage? We will see come August. But that's what he's trying to say there. Trump talks, I do.
And you're seeing these Republicans use March. I think it was Asa Hutchinson who said yesterday for messaging, and perhaps April for some of them is for announcing if you're going down that road. But that is exactly what they're trying to do, is try and find a lane for themselves. That Donald Trump has that Trump lane already. They're all trying to find a lane for themselves right now. DeSantis talking out a very clear one for himself. You saw Chris Sununu over the weekend talking about trying to get independents and getting their support. There's not a lot of support if you look in that polling outside of Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump currently. So how are they all going to distinguish themselves?